Well, after we had finished 8 months in Africa, we made the trip up from Alexandria on a ferry through Cyprus to Beirut and began the Southwest Asian and South Asian and Southeast Asian, eventually part of our trip. But when we were on that ferry coming from Cyprus into Beirut, we'd heard this phrase in the mid-60s, which was very common at that time, that Beirut is the jewel of the Middle East. And the first impression we had on it at that time truly supported that description. We happened to come into Beirut at night on the ferry, and so it was dark around, but all these beautiful lights that were so plentiful all around Beirut just looked like the sparkling of a jewel or diamond bracelet or whatever. I mean, it just was beautiful, visually beautiful as a city to approach from the coast like that. But the other thing that I think we discovered, that was also true for some good number of years, but then later disintegrated, was at that time Beirut and Lebanon truly were a model of an effective city and nation state, despite the challenges of having multiple very different religious groups. And they had found a way to structure it so the groups were cooperating and collaborating, which made the city work as the financial center of the whole Middle East at that time. And effectively, in terms of political problems and getting things done and so forth, they worked with each other. That later, like I say, I forget what decade it was, but it later broke down and had some civil wars there. But at that time, it truly was the jewel of the Middle East. So we spent some time there, but then went south to the country of Jordan, and there visit an archaeological site that's widely known through the world called Petra. And what was remarkable to me about it, just as a novice from a guy who grew up on the cornfields of southern Illinois, was seeing a city that was totally carved into the rose-colored sandstones of a mountain. So you had this valley that came through this mountainous area with a neck at the front of it so they could easily defend it. But you go in here, and here's the side of the mountain, and then inside was carved out this huge auditorium or this reception room or this whatever. It was the whole city carved into the side of this rose-colored mountain in the sandstone there. Still standing after 100 years. Maybe tell the background of it, Jeff, what the story of this town was.
The Nabateans, about 600 BC, established it. And what Petra was, it was sort of an entrepot as the various herbs and spices and other commodities from the Arabian Peninsula would move northward. And so it was sort of an initial entrepot similar to Damascus, which was rather larger. The Nabateans were incredibly ingenious people. Water spreading and water harvesting and all of this was a part of their accomplishments. And it's still being done. The Israelis at Ben Gurion University have tried to reconstruct these systems, and as they've found, the systems are far more sophisticated than what replaced them. And so it's an interesting area. We then moved north into.
But tell about going into Amman, didn't we? That wasn't it, while we were in Jordan. We went to Amman and met Faiz Louden. Was that there?
It was in this area of the old city of Jerusalem occupied.
Okay. Yeah.
By Jordan.
Right. So it was in Jordan, sort of, but not Amman. Okay.
And so we went into the old city of Jerusalem, which again was occupied by or administered by Jordan. Mm-hmm. And do you want to mention?
Well, go ahead. About Faiz, who it was.
Faiz Louden, we met with him. He was one of our instructors in Peace Corps in Persian. Was a Presbyterian minister, and
from Iran.
So that's the language. Just a wonderful person. And so we got to know a little bit about Jerusalem, and which, from my point of view, is a place that just seems sort of sacred. Everything seemed to work well. I mean, people from the various quartiers, Christians and Muslims and Jews and others seemed to get along really quite well. And of course the historical aspects of it were fascinating.
One of the other things that I really appreciated about Faiz Laoudi, I mean, it was a delight to meet him again in Jordan, but going back to his being the language training, the director of the language training portion of our Peace Corps training back in the United States, he was the director of that, and that was the single largest part of our Peace Corps training. We spent 4 hours every day, 5 days a week for 10 weeks. Was that
10
right?
weeks.
Yeah, 10 weeks. And it really took us a long way. But during my life, I have studied lots of different languages, some in formal classes, like when I was an undergraduate, and some later on, and some informally. But of all the language training I've ever done, none have been as effective as the program that he put us through at Utah State University, where he did that. But his whole approach to language teaching, he did this because he was a professor of teaching language back at Michigan State University, but the idea he brought with us was not to read a book and learn about it, in which case you learn how to read it, and the meaning of words are attached to what your eyes see, i.e. the printed word, then you have to learn how to hear it right. What he did was reverse that. For the first 9 out of the 10 weeks in our training program, the only thing we did was hear the Persian language. We didn't read it until the 10th week. He showed us the alphabet and how to put the words together. So he would say it, we would hear it and say it back, hear it, say it, hear it, say it, hear it, say it. And what this did was help us attach the meaning of the words to the sound of it, which is what we would be getting in conversation, not our eyes, which would have to translate that into what we see. Then once we got to the end, it turned out the Persian language is written and spoken in a very phonetic way. So the sounds equal the printed words, and the printed words equal the sounds. So then it was easy to make that translation. But that initial 9 weeks of just getting the sounds and the meanings and then building up the grammar, that was the most effective training program. And he was the one that really put it together for us in an outstanding way, I thought. I want to give him credit for that.
And he claimed that he could teach villagers to write in a day.
Yeah, yeah. He just knew how to do that.
And he did it for us, and it was really quite remarkable.
We had a week and it worked. Yeah, we could write it and read it.
Yeah.
So thanks, Dr. Laoudi.
Right. So in Lebanon, we left Jerusalem, again, went into the interior of Lebanon to fall back an archaeological site. And it's interesting, so many of the sites are associated with the Romans and so on, because of the nature of the Canaanitish amalgam, as it's called, old kingdoms of the past. They go back further and further and further. So we have actually no idea what the origins of these sites are. We then went along to, it's basically the western corridor in Syria after visiting the archaeological sites, Palmyra and so on. And it was interesting. The cities, Homs, Homa, and Homs have these incredible water wheels. I mean, they were just huge and in functioning and in milling. And the antiquities and so on of this area was Damascus, one of the oldest cities in the world, this major entrepot, where commerce would gather and caravans would enter the city and provide all this variety of goods and so on. And it has the oldest university in the world, and just the whole area from an historical, cultural, material cultural perspective was just fascinating. And then we continued northward to Aleppo. And in Aleppo, we were guided through the bazaar by the market, which was a sort of a cavernous underground thing, and by a young man. the crafts and so on that were being produced, really sophisticated inlay and different. It was just jewelry and so on. It was quite remarkable. But as he would introduce us to the merchants, I realized that he was introducing us as being East German. And so I wasn't quite sure if he didn't know who we were or what this was, and then realized later that just that day, or the day before perhaps, West Germany had recognized Israel. Excuse me. And so he again was just trying to, sort of protect us from whatever response there might have been. And then we continued eastward to Deir ez-Zor from there, and then into Iraq. As we were entering Iraq, came in through Deir ez-Zor, which is a significantly large city or large village or small city, I guess. And one of the issues was that the Turks were putting in this large complex of dams on the Tigris and Euphrates, and leaving the Syrians in many cases with a dry Euphrates. And we're really struck by the issue of water in the Jordan River and the various litany and the various rivers of that region. And of course, this continues to be a major issue. We came into Iraq. We were driving, and just as Dee specialized in breaking axles, I specialized more or less in rolling the car over. And we came into. We're driving south towards some archaeological ruins and so on. And the Iraqis had very cleverly sealed the road with oil, and because they had a lot of it, and roads, and so it was raining, and we could feel the Land Rover just sort of out of control, and it rolled over. But again, dealing with the local populations, sort of these men sort of rushed out, and they looked it over, and they uprighted the Land Rover and went home. Mm-hmm. And it was just again this sort of spontaneous generosity and so on of the local population. We went down to some of the major archaeological sites, Ur of the Chaldees, where Abram was said to have resided, and it was interesting, and the Iraqis were so well informed regarding their own historical past. It was interesting to talk with them and being informed by them. We had visited also the Babylonian ruins near Baghdad, and these sort of remarkable mosques that extended into this area of Shiite mosques and Sunni mosques and all this religious complexity of the region, and then down to Basra.
Yeah, and had just a humorous little event when I was down in Basra. We went into, I guess it was a border building where the people who control the border and check passports and all that stuff were, but we were in there doing our paperwork as expediter. That was my job. But what I noticed was a map on the wall. And of course, Basra is in a town in Iraq, but right at the head or near the head of the Persian Gulf, or what we in the West know as the Persian Gulf, right between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But on that map, it was not called the Persian Gulf. It was called the Gulf of Basra. And what it made me realize is different people around the world put their own labels on things, and it's not necessarily globally agreed upon what they're going to call things. And in Iran, of course, they're glad to call it the Persian Gulf. In the West, we generally do that. But in Iraq, not so. Gulf of Basra. And then we went down to Kuwait.
Went down to Kuwait, and it was a free port, and so it permitted us to do a little bit of work on the Land Rover and so on. It's very western, Kuwait was. We then traveled north to Baghdad and beyond into Iran. But it again was interesting, the kind of the historical context of this. I mentioned the rivers and the sort of struggle, the competition over water and so on. But this has gone on for centuries, for millennia, really, with animal domestication and so on, in the devegetation of the area. The Persian Gulf, or the Gulf of Basra, as we call it over in this chair, or the Arabian Gulf, as others call it, had extended all the way to what is now Baghdad, and then the silt and so on from environmental degradation just filled it up until it's well to the south. But again, one of the consequences of this unusual chapter in environmental history of the plant and animal domestication. And Mesopotamia, of course, is incredibly important as an area of innovation.